Hello, my name is Melissa Subock. I am a speech language pathologist at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders at Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore, Maryland. Today, I am going to talk to you all about the role of augmentative alternative communication systems. Just to kind of give a little bit of background information, as I had mentioned, I'm an SLP at CARD and I've been here for 11 years. I started my career as an applied behavioral analysis therapist or an ABA therapist while I was in graduate school for speech pathology. Currently I supervise SLP staff trainees, which include graduate students and clinical fellows. And I've over the years specialized in augmentative alternative communication or AAC for children and young adults with autism spectrum disorder. In terms of disclosures, I receive an annual salary from Kennedy Krieger, as well as financial compensation for presentation. To kind of get started, I wanted to provide a definition of AAC from the American Speech Language and Hearing Association. Augmentative alternative communication describes multiple ways to communicate that can supplement, meaning add on, or compensate either temporarily or permanently for the impairment and disability patterns of individuals with severe expressive communication disorders. We talk about supplementation as something that we can use in addition to other forms of communication, as in verbal communication. Compensation can be a way to either temporarily, meaning, a post-stroke or traumatic brain injury, and when individuals are in recovery, they might temporarily need AAC to help them communicate. And then also permanently. So if an individual does not either regain their speech that they had prior to an event, or an individual or young child does not go on to develop verbal communication, they can use AAC throughout their lifespan. And there are very many options for communication using these methods. AAC includes all forms of communication other than oral speech that are used to express thoughts, needs, wants, and ideas. This includes both aided and unaided modes of communication. So I'll kind of break that down a little bit. When we think about unaided methods or modes of communication, we think about tools that we can use without external supports, things that we already have all the time. Things like facial expressions, gestures, American Sign Language. Those are all things that we don't need extra materials for. Aided communication refers to written language, low-tech or no-tech AAC supports like picture exchange communication system or PECS, and then also speech generating devices or voice output systems. And we're going to go into those a little bit more later. In terms of making decisions about AAC, the current evidence suggests that there are no specific prerequisite skills for introducing AAC, which in the past, there have been discussions about what types of skills does a person have to demonstrate to be able to introduce AAC. And what the research has really indicated is that there are no prerequisite skills needed to get AAC on board or to introduce AAC to a person. AAC can be useful for any person who cannot use speech or chooses not to use speech as a primary method of meeting their communication needs. So when we think about, are these supports needed? We need to think about, is a person who's interested in using AAC or we're considering implementing AAC, are they able to communicate across all communication partners, caregivers, intervention providers, teachers, healthcare professionals, peers? So sometimes kids or young adults will be able to communicate beautifully at home with their gestures or body movements or speech approximations. Their highly familiar communication partners may understand what they're trying to say, but are those communication attempts understood by all communication partners? So if your child gets separated from you at the mall or the grocery store, are they able to effectively communicate with someone in terms of meeting their safety needs or their psychosocial needs or their medical needs? And if that answer is no, we should be considering implementing AAC supports or exploring those options to see what our child or young adult might benefit from or be interested in using to help meet those communication needs. We also need, again, I kind of touched on this a little bit, we also need to be thinking about all contexts and settings. So home, community, school, hospital, all environments. All people should have access to AAC, regardless of age, cognitive ability, language level, motor ability. We can provide accommodations to help anyone access an AAC support. So for example, a young child might need a lightweight device that they can carry around easily versus a bigger device that might need to be mounted to a wheelchair. It might be too heavy for a young child to carry around. Cognitive ability and language ability, we can make those accommodations. We do a formal language assessment and AAC assessment to determine where the child or the person is at cognitively in terms of their language levels to help identify a device that's going to meet those needs. And then motor abilities. If a person needs alternate access methods like an eye gaze machine, eye gaze support, or a scanner where they may not be able to select the individual icons, but might need to just hit the button once or twice. So there's a scanning method of accessing AAC and other types of tools that can help individuals with motor differences be able to successfully access a communication support. AAC serves a wide variety of communicators, and we're going to talk about the different ways in which a person can access these tools. When we think about an emerging communication or emerging communicator, we think about unintentional communicators. So we might make sounds, but not assign meaning to those sounds just yet. We might have non-symbolic communication, meaning I might make those sounds and I might direct them, but they aren't maybe tied to a specific object or activity. They might even be able to communicate a few basic wants and needs like hunger and thirst, but not yet able to communicate about a wide variety of objects and activities. Intentional or context dependent communicators are reliable symbolic communication. They might have reliable symbolic communication. So I know that when I look at this picture of a ball, it means that ball that's over there on the shelf. I have that symbolic communication. I know what this represents. But language might be, or vocabulary might still be limited in terms of, the vocabulary that they might know, understand, or use. So there might be 25 words that they understand, but not an infinite number, which we develop over time. And then also limited pragmatic functions. So a context-dependent or intentional communicator might be able to communicate for requesting, but maybe not yet for commenting or engaging in conversations. So those pragmatic functions are limited. And they might also have a limited number of communication partners that they're able to communicate with at that moment. So like I gave the example earlier of a person that might be able to communicate really well with their caregivers at home, but not so well with an unfamiliar communication partner. So with our intentional but context-dependent communicators, we're looking at those limited communication partners. Independent communicators are going to be using novel utterances. They will be communicating about several different pragmatic functions. So social, they might have narrative language. They might be able to request and engage in conversations, and communicate about a wide variety of topics, and have multiple communication partners that they're effectively communicating with. So thinking about introducing AAC, it's highly important, it's very, very important to be doing a full evaluation before we determine what systems we're going to try with a person. Typically, our AAC evaluations consider, as I had mentioned earlier, their current skills. So language, cognition, motor, hearing, vision, motivation to communicate, literacy level. Do they need symbols and picture or symbols and words, or is this a person who can just use words or type their communication? We're looking at a person's strengths and needs, communication environments and contexts. Is this a person who lives at home? Are they living independently? Are they in a hospital? What does their communication environment look like? And then also the potential for growth. So when we think about choosing or trying a new AAC system, I don't want to just pick something that they can use today. And then, 6 months down the line, they need a new system because they've outgrown their system. We want to see, over the next several years, what is a system that can meet current needs, but also teach language and teach pragmatic functions, and really help the individual grow in their language and communication. Another thing to just mention really quickly, although we are assessing these skills to help guide where we're going to start, we are not limiting a person's ability to access a system based on their current skills. So we just kind of need a starting point, but we are going to look at a wide range of systems over time. And it's very important to use a dynamic assessment approach to AAC evaluation. We'll talk a little bit about the differences between dynamic approach and a standard approach. So when we look at standard assessments, these are going to be those very typical, you go into the room, you do a standardized language assessment, you get the results. It's a standard score, percentile rank, age equivalency. You're going to get those actual scores. These are empirically developed evaluation tools with established reliability and validity. And they must be culturally and linguistically appropriate, meaning that the test that we're using had to be standardized on a sample of people who have the same cultural and linguistic background. And if there's any deviation from the administration procedures or the standardization sample, these are not considered valid assessments, which means that when we're working with individuals with complex communication needs, oftentimes our standardized assessment tools are not the best representation of a person's overall skill set. So we need to use a dynamic assessment approach, which includes observation of communication in a variety of contexts, interview with communication partners. So we're going to be talking to caregivers, teachers, intervention providers, the child's current speech language pathologists at school, their private intervention providers, ABA therapists if they have them. And then also we want to be able to modify tasks and response methods to be able to fully capture a person's skills and potential. So we're trying to use this dynamic assessment approach. Oftentimes, I'm just going to go back for 1 second. Oftentimes, insurance companies will require both. So you may find that when you go in to pursue an AAC evaluation, you're going to start with that standard assessment to get those scores. And then your follow-up assessment is going to be more of that dynamic assessment approach. So although we recommend that dynamic assessment approach, we typically have to use both to be able to get a well-rounded assessment that is going to help us fund an AAC system if we go that route. So as I had mentioned, once we determine where a child or a person is falling in terms of their communication, we are able to kind of pare down the types of tools that we're using with the person, or we're trying a starting point. So when we think back to those emerging communicators, we might be thinking about a single message or an errorless sequential message device. So when we're thinking about those, and I'm going to show you those in just a second, we might be thinking about a switch that just has one button that the person pushes and it gives you a message like eat or bathroom or help or break. You might be using digital photos or pictures with words. So on that button, you might put a picture of a person signing help and the word help underneath. You might be using digitized or synthesized speech. Those are going to be either they're going to be either computer generated speech or you're programming the speech into the device. And it's going to be a static device. And what that means is that the pages are not going to change. The pictures are not going to change. What you see on that button or that device is what the communication method is going to be, or the communication message is going to be. Intentional communication or intentional communicators might have limited communication messages per page. So they might have a few different messages on a device. Again, digitized or synthesized speech. We might start to introduce those symbolic pictures, icons. So, a picture of the ball is going to be, a cartoon representation of a ball instead of that blue spiky ball that they have at home that they love. It's going to start to represent the object so that if a child is exposed to a different ball that looks slightly different, they're able to generalize that one icon to multiple different types of balls. And then also we're going to be using messages. We might have messages and phrases at this point, combining words into phrases. Independent communicators are using, again, digitized or synthesized speech. They're going to be using more dynamic display devices that might have multiple pages. So an example of a speech generating system, I might hit the word I, and then it's going to switch the page. And then I might say need, and then it's going to switch the page again and give me all of the options for things I might need. So we're navigating through pages. The display is going to change. There's options to customize those systems, really across the board with all systems, but it's just a more complex system that we're looking at. Core vocabulary. Core vocabulary are going to be those words that might be used across multiple different contexts. So they might be more general words like want, go, up, more, versus more specific words like cookie, ruler, car, those types of things that are going to be more activity specific. So we're thinking about that core vocabulary being, I can generalize this vocabulary to a lot of different contexts. We might even introduce text to speech. So for individuals who have literacy skills, they might be able to type. We're not going to provide a speech generating system that has a ton of pictures. We might just be using words or word prediction, where we type in the first couple letters of a word and lots of different options pop up that we can select. So you might be looking at more of a text-based system at this point. In terms of very specific devices that we might be using, a Big Mac switch, which again is one of those the devices that just has the single voice output button. Picture exchange communication system, and I know I mentioned this earlier, or PECS. That is a picture-based communication system that involves exchanging pictures of objects or representational objects or icons with a communication partner. It's very much a request-based system, although it does provide options for commenting. But oftentimes when we're using PECS, it follows an ABA approach to teaching language. And so for our emerging communication partners or emerging communicators, this can often be a good starting point to teach the basic foundations of communication. I give you something and I get something in return. And it can be really motivating because typically we're using reinforcing items to teach that communication system. So that's going to be a good one for those emerging communicators. A GoTalk One is a device that's offered through Attainment Company. And that is a single button system. You press the button and it speaks a message. So if we're playing with blocks, you might put a picture of blocks and your communication partner hits blocks and it speaks the message for them. There's also a very affordable option for these single button voice output systems. They're called learning resources, recordable answer buzzers. They're like available on Amazon. They're, I think, $16 for a pack of 4, but they're also a good starting point in that you push the button and it speaks the message. Intentional communicators might be using visual scene displays like Scene Speak or Go Visual. And these are systems that might be a photograph of a person's bedroom or a photograph of a person's kitchen. And as you touch the different points of that scene, I might touch refrigerator and it'll tell me refrigerator or open. I might touch the point in the screen that says hot on the oven and it's going to say hot. But it's a full picture of an actual scene. It might be even the playground and you hit slide or swing versus a grid display that's going to have multiple different symbols or pictures within a grid. So they might be using those at that point. And also more simple voice output systems like a GoTalk, which is a dedicated system, or GoTalk Now, which is an app that you can get on an iPad. But those are going to be typically more simple. They're not progressive systems. They're not going to be a system where you have to navigate through multiple pages to look for icons. Everything related to your activity that you're engaging in is going to be on that page. So if you're having a snack, all of your snack items are going to be on that page. And then maybe like eat and drink might be on that page too. But you're not going to be going back and forth between the pages. They're typically activity specific. There are some modifications that you can make to these systems to make them more dynamic, and that you can go through the pages to find different activities. But these systems give you the option to simplify, to build skills in communication. Our independent communicators might be using more complex voice output systems or speech generating devices. Proloquo to Go is an example. Touch Chat AAC, Lamp Words for Life, Grid for iPad. These are all examples of different speech generating devices or apps that you can get on an iPad. And then there are picture-based systems that are more dynamic. One is called the Flip and Talk. That is a system that has a core vocabulary, like a picture-based board at the bottom. And then you have like a flip chart at the top where you can look at the different pictures to use them to communicate. But you're flipping through that flip chart at the top to look for your vocabulary. So you're not going to see everything on that one page. And the Flip and Talk is an example of a system that does not have voice output. It is a picture-based system that you can either point to or you can point and use it to verbalize. So I use that system sometimes with my patients who might have some echolalic speech, but their spontaneous speech might be limited. It kind of helps provide a cue to help enhance that verbal communication or the spontaneous verbal communication. And then we have the text to speech, which is, you can find that on an iPhone or another type of smartphone that you might be using. Here are some examples. We talked about PECs. Over here is an example of a PECs board or a PECs book. Looks like they have all their little animals and they might be doing a block activity. Here's the Flip and Talk that I was talking about, that picture-based communication system. And then we have topic boards. So these are just single page picture-based communication systems that you can print out and use to model language on, and they're, again, activity specific. So for this one, it's about a bubble activity. So all the words we might want to use or teach about a bubble activity are going to be on that same page. You can make different pages for different activities that you're doing. I really like these for activities that we might be doing that might be really messy, or if you're in the pool getting swimming lessons, you're not going to be wanting to bring your speech generating device in the pool. So these can be a nice either backup option for AAC, or if your child is working more on social communication, it's a good visual cue to help encourage that spontaneous social communication. These are more of those low or light tech communication systems. I mentioned the Big Mac earlier. There's also, these are those learning resources, recordable answer buzzers. And then this is called a twin talk. So this is a 2-message system that you can use to communicate 2 messages with. We have those mid-tech options. You'll see the Go Talk 20, the Go Talk 9, and then this one at the bottom is called a text speak. These are all, again, those more activity specific or context specific devices where everything you might need to talk about related to a specific activity is going to be on there. And a lot of these systems have multiple levels or layers, so you're able to change out those pictures as you change your activities. And then we have our more complex or high-tech systems. So we have, this one is a grid pad right here from SmartBox. We have a Tobii Dynavox device right here. And then at the very bottom, we have our PRC Saltillo products. I see a touch chat here. And lamp-based device. These are going to be called the Via Pro. That's their latest system that has multiple different apps or vocabulary sets that you can put on it. So now I want to talk a little bit about the implementation of AAC. Parent implementation, as you can imagine, of AAC within the home environment and community-based context can pose significant challenges. Oftentimes, parents don't have a background in speech-language pathology or AAC. They're learning with their children or learning with their providers, and that's okay. It's our job to help support whole families in the use of AAC. But a lot of the research has indicated that there's a high level of rejection and abandonment following the introduction of AAC. Rejection refers to dismissing the AAC system prior to any attempt to use it at home or in the community or in the classroom. I mean, I'm talking about parents right now because that's what the research project was focusing on, but we see this with teachers too, or any communication partner that doesn't have a background in AAC or speech and language pathology. So rejection is that dismissing it, this is not going to work for us. We're going to go back to our current communication methods that have been effective for X amount of years. Or abandonment, meaning we've tried this for a little bit, it's really hard, there's too many moving pieces, or we don't see independence, so we're gonna abandon it, we're gonna give up on it, despite an ongoing need. A study conducted by Johnson et al. Found that about 39% of AAC systems introduced by SLPs were used for more than a year, and that's a pretty low number when we think about what goes into identifying and obtaining an AAC system. About less than half of those systems are still being used a year after they've been introduced. So we need to think about where these breakdowns are occurring and try to figure out how we can increase the implementation or consistency in encouraging the use of these AAC systems when they are needed. So what we provide is high levels of training, both with families and children. We can see a child 1 hour a week and work on these systems, but really it's what happens outside of that 1 hour that's going to make the biggest impact. So it's our job to teach how to implement these systems outside of just that 1 hour a week that we might be seeing a person for therapy. So some ideas for things that you can do at home to help implement these systems. One of them is identifying motivating activities that your child enjoys. So we are way more motivated to communicate about things that we want versus things that we don't really care about. So it's going to be really important to communicate that with your providers. You know what? He doesn't really like doing puzzles, but he really likes bubbles, or he really likes watching Paw Patrol videos on YouTube. We're not going to then do the puzzle. We're going to do the Paw Patrol video, because when he leaves our office and goes home, he's going to be doing those Paw Patrol videos. So it's more important for us to teach communication around motivating activities versus things that we might have available that are not as fun. Working with your child's SLP on learning to program the new device so that you feel comfortable adding words and icons to the system. So really knowing how to add vocabulary. If you are going to a birthday party or the water park or the library, making sure that you are comfortable in adding the vocabulary that's related to that experience so that your child is able to communicate in those moments and you're able to model on the device how to communicate about those experiences. We want to make sure that the words that your child would need, as I just mentioned, to use during those activities are available on the system. And then initially we want to model language on the AAC system while you're talking. And this really, modeling improves understanding of both the purpose of the system and the words that are on the system. So if I'm modeling for a child, we want to eat the veggie straws or play blocks or build tower, I am showing that this system can be used to communicate in our activity. So the purpose of the system. We're also building receptive vocabulary. So when we are talking about those words and we're saying build, tower, open door, library, books, shelf, we're adding so many more words to a person's receptive vocabulary. That can improve their ability to use the system in a variety of different contexts. It can also improve expressive communication. And that's really what some of the research has indicated, is that with the use of these systems, we can improve both use of the system and verbal communication abilities as well. We want to accept all attempts that a person makes to use his or her system, even if they make a mistake. So you're going to repeat the word or the phrase that your child activates on their system if it's correct. Yeah, we want to validate what they've just said. I saw that big tower. That big tower crashed. I saw. So they know, you know what I just said, that message got to my communication partner. I can do this again. It builds confidence. We want to model words or phrases that are relevant to the activity if it's not related. So sometimes we might be really interested in numbers, but there are no numbers on the activity that we do. So I oftentimes will have kids have their specific interests, and they're talking about those specific interests. I might talk about that briefly and then kind of just model some words that they could use during this activity to just expand that vocabulary and see if it's interesting to them. And then expanding on communication by adding words. So we can, if a person says, Ball, I might say throw ball. Just like I would with verbal communication, I'm going to model on the device an expansion. So a child who might be using words might say ball, and I might say throw the ball. I'm going to do that same thing on the device. They might say ball, and I'm going to model throw ball. And that's an expansion. So that's another way that we can help encourage language growth on the device. And then also at home, you can make simple changes to the environment to tempt your child to communicate using their system. So for snacks, rather than, when they say chips, rather than giving a whole bag of chips, we might give just a few and then see what happens. Are they going to go back to their device again to say chips again? With toys, blocks are a great example because it has multiple pieces. So I might say blocks or build one time. I'm going to give you a few blocks, and then I'm going to take a turn and I'm going to build some blocks. And then you might say blocks again, and I'll give you a few more of the blocks, or I might give you the blocks from my tower. Daily living activities are also a huge way to encourage your child or individual to communicate using their device. So one of the first things I will ask to target is like dressing activities or hand washing, or setting the table for a meal or a snack, simple meal prep too. Those are all examples of things that we can do because they're already part of our daily routines. We're already doing them. So using the device within those things that we're already doing, those activities we're already doing at home, can be a way to show or encourage the use of the AAC system. So, for example, we're getting dressed in the morning. All right, we're getting dressed in the morning. What are we going to do? We need to take jammies off. And I might model those 3 words on the child's device. Put shirt on. Which shirt do you want? And then there might be pictures of different shirts that they might have on their communication system. And the child can pick which one they want. Okay, we're going to put shirt on. We might model those words on the device. Okay, what's next? What do we need next? Put pants on, put shoes on, and then you've modeled so much vocabulary within an activity that's already on the schedule for the day. We have to get dressed to go out. So we're already going to be doing this. Let's use this as an opportunity to model on the device and encourage communication. Book activities are also a really fun one. So we might be using those activities to modeling language on them. Aided language modeling refers to pairing symbol selection with either pointing to an icon on a visual scene display or activating a symbol using a model. We might model words or short phrases on your child's AAC system, like I said, throughout the day during many different types of activities, and work on generalization. So modeling words and phrases across multiple activities. Aided language modeling is a research-based term, but it really just refers to modeling on the system while you're talking about what you're doing. And pairing aided language input or modeling on the system with spoken language is recommended. It reduces something called input-output asymmetry, which means we want to, whatever we expect our child to be saying and how we expect them to be communicating is what we need to be doing. So if my goal is I have a verbal communicator, I'm going to use verbal communication. If I have a person who's using a device, I need to make sure that I'm also modeling on the device to make it symmetrical. My input, what I'm providing to the child, is going to match the output, what I expect them to be doing. Often we want to encourage multimodal communication, so we want to be using both. I am going to be speaking, I'm going to be using words while I'm modeling on the system, because ultimately we want to give our communication partner the option to use verbal communication if they're able to and motivated to and can, and then also use their device. And this improves language expression and comprehension, so the understanding and use of language for people who use AAC. I do have a video that I want to play. It is a model of what these activities might look like at home. So I'm going to show you that now. We want to be rewarding all the attempts that your child is making to use their system. They might make mistakes, and that's okay. If they choose an incorrect icon, as I had mentioned earlier, we're going to model the correct icon as we are rewarding them for the attempt. I might still give you the cookie if you said cracker by accident, but I'm still going to model that word cookie because that's what we have in front of us. And after practicing this several times, you might challenge your child by prompting him or her to select the correct icon, meaning you might hand over hand prompt them, take their hand and help them push it. Or you might just select the button or hover over it. These are cookies, and see if just that extra cue can help before giving that reward. We want to recognize that this is a tool that your child, it's new for them. So they might be oftentimes resorting back to the types of communication that they were using prior to implementation of the system. So they might initiate communication by grabbing an item. That's something I see often. Prior to AAC implementation, kids are oftentimes using physical means. They might take your hand and lead you somewhere. They might give you an item to request help. They might try to grab it themselves. And so it's not uncommon for kids to be going back to the way they were communicating prior to AAC implementation. So we might notice that in the beginning, they're not taking to the device because they've spent, several years using this type of communication. It's going to take time. And we want to shape these attempts by responding positively, again, by modeling, by providing natural consequences. So, I have balloon and I have car, and the child wants the car but says balloon. Well, maybe I'll give them the balloon and see what happens. And when they reject the balloon, I'm going to model car. Oh, you meant the car. So that next time they have the icon, they have that experience and might use that word on their device. And they need a ton of practice to start using AAC independently. This is not something that we expect that, a couple weeks after they've gotten the device that they're using it all on their own. It does take a lot of modeling and a lot of support to be able to use it independently. And I do want to say just one more thing about this is that it is a lot to start implementing. But when we think about typical language development, a person is exposed to words, a baby, for a full year before they ever learn to say their first words, right? Oftentimes, that's like the benchmark, the range. Although there is a range, I should say. For people with language delay or language disorders, that period is going to be stretched out. So they need to learn language. It's going to take a lot longer to learn the words and learn how they connect with the objects and the activities they're seeing. So we don't want to reject these systems or abandon these systems early on, because it might be that the person who's being introduced is learning the words, but not yet using them. So it's okay that it takes time to start to expressively use their system. And then here are, just to kind of wrap up a little bit, some different myths that we've talked about throughout today's talk. One of them is that AAC is a last resort in speech and language intervention. We are implementing AAC in the very beginning of language intervention if it is needed. We don't want to wait for communication breakdowns, frustration, decreased motivation. We don't want to wait for those things to pop up before we provide supports. We want to provide supports on the front end so that a person is motivated to communicate and not feeling those feelings of frustration. Myth number 2, AAC hinders or stops further speech development. There are several bodies of research that have supported positive gains in language in verbal communication development post AAC implementation. No bodies of research has indicated that it prohibits speech or replaces speech development. Myth number 3, children must have a certain set of skills to be able to benefit from AAC. And we talked about that at the very beginning. We can find a system to meet the person's needs. There are no prerequisite skills. That is our job, to teach and support the skills. So there is no prerequisite skill that a person needs, because we have so many adaptations to devices that we can make to meet their needs. Speech generating systems are only for children with intact cognition. That is not true either. Again, we can make those modifications to meet cognitive needs. A lot of times people with communication difficulties or medical diagnoses like autism, they may also have cognitive delays. And so it's important that we need to consider the cognitive level of a person to be able to select a system that's going to meet their needs, but it is not going to stop us from implementing the AAC system. And children have to be a certain age to benefit from AAC. We don't have a minimum age. Again, kind of going back to AAC as a last resort, or that the fact that it stops speech and language development or verbal communication development, we know that those things are not true. So there's no point in waiting to help provide these supports. And last, there is representational hierarchy of symbols from objects to written words. This just means, we have to start with maybe photos and then move to icons and then to objects and then to written words. There's no hierarchy or method in which we make those changes. It's all going to be person specific. What is their preference? How can they most easily communicate with us? Okay, so here are some references. I'm now going to open up for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the Augmentative and Alternative Communication Systems Q&A. My name is Alison Holbrook, Clinical Research Scientist for Simon's Searchlight, and I'm joined by speech-language pathologist Melissa Subock, who just gave a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Melissa, for your very informative talk on AAC systems. And now we're excited to get started with the Q&A session to address some of your questions. For everyone listening in, you'll be able to see and hear me on your screen, although I won't be able to see or hear you. We welcome you to ask questions in the Q&A box. Please remember to avoid including personal health information in your questions for your own privacy. We apologize in advance if we do not get to your questions. We will try to cover as many as possible. And since there are many genetic groups represented, it may be difficult to answer very specific questions. With all that said, let's get started with the Q&A discussion and hear from you all. So let's go ahead and get started with one here. Once you have an AAC, if you have not had a good amount of training on how to set it up to best serve your child, where can someone find training options?
That's a great question. There's several different ways that you can go about receiving additional training and support and learning how to use and implement your child's AAC device. It depends on where and who set up the system. So if you're getting it from the school, many school systems have an assistive technology team where they can provide initial parent training on how to use that system. And then you can always follow up with your local speech and language pathology clinic or local hospital system, pediatric hospital system. Many of those programs have an assistive technology team where they can provide additional training and support. Now, if you've received that device through an insurance funded system or an insurance-based system, a lot of times the representative from that company who manufactured the system will provide training and support for you, your child, and your child's intervention team. So if it's an insurance funded system, I highly encourage any families or caregivers to seek out those resources because they're flexible. You've already kind of covered the funding through insurance when you got the device initially. So utilizing those resources is a really good way to get that additional support.
Okay, great. So a lot of families are bilingual or speak languages other than English at home. What AAC options are available for them and their children?
Fortunately, with the advancement and the increase in accessibility of systems, particularly iPad-based systems, even if they're coming from an assistive technology program, they have bilingual language options. In order to get those language options, I'd highly encourage you to work with a bilingual service provider, whether that's a speech language pathologist, or if you're going through the school, you're working with your assistive technology team, involve your ESOL team as well at school, so that it is a collaborative approach to programming the system. But many systems that are coming through insurance or even tablets, like apps that you could get in the App Store, offer additional languages. So depending on the language that your family speaks or your child speaks, sharing that information with your service provider will allow them to tailor the type of system to meet their language needs. And then once we know, oftentimes it's very simple and easy to make sure that all of the languages that your child is exposed to or uses are available to them on their AAC device.
Great, thank you so much. So what sorts of adaptations are there for nonverbal kids with ASD who need to use AAC but have certain visual processing weaknesses? So for example, poor abilities with visual scanning or tracking or visual attention.
Visual attention is actually a big one that we see in our clinic. It's part of its motivation. If we're engaged in a social situation and it's really challenging to maintain a conversation, or it's stressful or new, we tend to see that visual attention drop. So part of that is using the child's system and motivating activities at first, so they see the value in that system. So when it's time to engage in less preferred activities or even more novel environments or contexts, that they already have the background to be able to utilize their system. Now, we do offer different strategies and supports to help increase visual attention. Sometimes it's the type of symbol on the system that's more motivating or catches attention better. So that's why it's so important to really use a wide range of systems in the trial phase to see what the child is preferring in terms of the types of symbols, what they look like. Sometimes it's easier to process real photographs versus icons, and all of that should be done during the evaluation phase before we ever decide with the family which system we're going to use. And then further, if a person has significant visual difficulties or differences, there are additional supports, things like changing the backlighting of the system, adding grids outside, like physical grids outside of the device itself, like a key guard. Those are things that actually go on top of the device itself to help either increase the visual attention, or even from a motor perspective, help isolate those symbols so that a person can activate the symbols a little bit more easily. So there are a lot of different supports that we can provide that are going to be very specific to the individual person using the system. But we do have a lot of tools and supports that we can use to help better access the devices.
Thank you. I really love how wonderful AAC systems are at being able to be individualized like that to help for different needs. Are speech language pathologists the only interprofessional group that have expertise to obtain AAC systems? Where can other interprofessional groups, such as psychotherapists for individuals with dual diagnosis, obtain training?
A lot of the device companies offer additional training for professionals and for families in increasing their knowledge and skills related to AAC. So there are oftentimes, if you go on a device company's website, there are trainings on how to model AAC or how to program, what vocabulary systems to consider. And they're usually really good at being able to tailor trainings to meet the needs of the people who are accessing them. So there are some that are more geared towards families who are using devices at home for the first time, or even professionals in various settings, whether it's school or a healthcare clinic. But if you go on like a device company website, for example, Saltillo or Prenke Bromwich Company, they will provide oftentimes free webinars. There's also national conferences that happen several times per year across the US and even outside of the US that will tailor their talks to a wide variety of professionals. While AAC is very a field that is very centered around communication. So a lot of SLPs have experience with it. It is something that's used by a wide variety of healthcare professionals and school-based professionals. So it is important to have everyone access those trainings and be able to develop skills in the area.
Great, thank you. So here is another one. Do you often see older children who are verbal, but are limited in their expressive language ability and able to incorporate the AAC into their lives?
Yeah, so there's different levels of communication skills that people express who are accessing AAC. Sometimes kids or young adults even may be able to use single words or even some short phrases to get their basic wants and needs met, but we're looking to expand on their communication. So yes, we do use AAC for a lot of different types of communicators of all ages. And again, those are going to try to meet the needs of those communicators. So if we have an older individual, teenager or young adult who has some verbal communication, but is not communicating effectively across all settings, and they are wanting to work on expanding their communication, we do have systems that are geared towards older individuals, adolescents, young adults. The icons may look a little bit different. If they have literacy skills, it might be something that has word prediction or typing. So it's really going to depend on the user and what their preferences are. But yes, we do use AAC supports to help with skills outside of just, single words or phrases or those early communicators.
And just to follow up on that, so when you've seen it added at an older age, have you seen it be able to expand these individuals' opportunities outside of their home in school?
Yes, when we implement AAC supports outside of the home, whether that's at school or workplace training, the context and the language that needs to be used in those settings varies greatly from what might need to be communicated about at home. And thinking back to the talk when we were talking about communicative competence and how a person might be really effectively communicating at the home because the communication partners are highly familiar individuals and they've been in that setting for a long period of time. Those needs are going to differ, particularly with our population of people with autism. They, a new environment might increase stress levels. It might create a sense of novelty that might require additional supports. So in the workplace, yes, the vocabulary is going to be different. The communication partners are going to be different. So the device is going to need to be tailored to be able to help the person communicate effectively in those new environments.
Okay, so thank you so much for expanding on that one. Here's another one. So what is your experience with integrated listening systems? And do you find them beneficial?
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to with that type of a system. I can certainly ask my colleagues and follow up on that if you'd like.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I think this will be our last question. Sorry, one second. A lot of AAC systems can be rather expensive. So do you have recommendations on free systems or ways for families to try different AAC systems without the financial commitment?
Yeah, so oftentimes especially with our little ones, when they're just getting started, things change really quickly. Their communication environment changes, their language skills change. So we're hesitant to jump into funding a very expensive system right away until we're really sure that there's some stabilization of their skills, so we can find a system that can work for a period of time. A lot of states have lending libraries. I know in Maryland, there's something called MD-TAP, or Maryland Technology Assistance Program. They provide loaner systems to families. Device companies will provide loaner systems so that you can borrow a system for 60 days, give or take, and trial it before committing. And then there are also free or low cost apps that you can download on your iPad if recommended. I would still work with an SLP to make sure that those systems are what are recommended, but there are options for that through the Apple Store as well. And oftentimes when we have kids who come in and we're not convinced or quite sure that we're going to go with one system or another, we will rely on those loaner programs, whether it's through, your state's loaner program or the device company's loaner program, or even through the App Store to be able to try systems before committing to that the financial piece of AAC funding.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone joining this Q&A session. We hope you learned some valuable information from this presentation and Q&A. Thank you, Melissa Subock, for sharing your presentation and participating in the Q&A.